Welcome to True Drew Podcast, your source for all things Nancy Drew. I'm your host, Avery, and on this podcast, we'll discuss everything from the Nancy Drew books, to computer games, to movie adaptations, and TV shows. Nothing is off the table. So if you're a True Drew, you'll definitely want to tune in for this podcast. All right. Hello, guys, and welcome back to another episode of True Drew Podcast. I hope you guys are doing well out there. I don't know how life has been treating you all lately. It's been kind of hectic on my end, but I'm so glad that I have this podcast and this community that just loves Nancy Drew. It's so nice to know that I can just turn to this and read a Nancy Drew book, and for a few minutes, the craziness of life just dissolves and goes away. So today we're going to be talking about mystery number 66 in the Nancy Drew series, Race Against Time, and this one is not to be confused with another Nancy Drew title by the exact same name. It's also called Race Against Time. It was number 2 in the Girl Detective series that came out in the early 2000s. I seriously doubt that that book has much in common with this one. I know for a fact that it doesn't have a vampire on the cover like this book does. This book always, I remember when I first got this huge stack of these Nancy Drew books at an estate sale a couple years ago now, this one stuck out to me because I was like, why is Nancy on the cover of this book with a vampire? And no, this is not a Nancy Drew Twilight crossover, but how funny would that be? Edward, a sparkly vampire, finds himself in the vicinity of River Heights, but his eye is drawn to a certain local girl who loves to solve mysteries. Yeah, I'm not feeling it. Edward also apparently doesn't have a thing for strawberry blondes, if I remember correctly from the Twilight series, and Nancy would never turn her back on Ned, okay? So it's not gonna happen. So another quick fact about this book, Race Against Time, in case you were wondering, it came out in 1982. So there are actually 3 separate book covers that I found for this book, and we'll save the vampire one, the most iconic, for last. So on the first version of this book cover, the book itself is blue, and Nancy has this similar colored shirt on. She's kind of in the left corner of this book cover, and she's got her hand up to her mouth like she's gasping, because there is a stable that's on fire, and then we can see a mansion in the background behind that, and that is the Grimsby Mansion, which plays very heavily into the story. On the second edition of this book cover, we have Nancy on the ground with her hand up, and she's wearing riding boots and riding clothes, and this black horse is just bucking into the air, about to fall on her, and we can again see the mansion in the background. This time the mansion looks more run down like it's supposed to in the story. This book cover edition also has a tagline, and it says, "When horseplay turns to foul play, Nancy takes the fall." And the third and final edition of this book cover, I really like this one. On this cover, Nancy is in the foreground. She's wearing this purple sheath looking dress, and her hair looks really pretty here, actually. She looks unlike any other Nancy representation that I've seen up to this point, but there's a vampire kind of lurking over her shoulder looking at her, and there's this mansion in the background, but it looks more like a castle, and there's a bat flying around. Honestly, when I first saw this book cover, I thought maybe it takes place in Transylvania, I don't know. But no, we stay in good old River Heights for this mystery, and it's funny because this book's plot centers a lot around this film club that Ned is a part of, and he actually plays this vampire in the movie that he's making, so I guess this is supposed to be Ned. Very interesting. But there's also a tagline on this book cover, and it says, "Nancy's latest case may go up in smoke. Can Nancy crack the mysteries before it's too late?" So the funny cover spoof that I came up with, I just went with this vampire cover because it's so iconic, and I just said Nancy meets Dracula, which really reminds me of the Nancy Drew Hardy Boys 1970s TV show. I think they meet Dracula in one episode. I think that's in season 2, which I have not watched yet, which I will watch for the podcast at some point. I may do that and cover that season fairly soon. So if I had to give these book covers a rating, I would probably say 3 magnifying glasses. I favor the one with the vampire though, because it makes a statement. It's very unique and it's very different. So now let's go ahead and discuss some of the many characters, because there's a lot in Race Against Time. So first up, we have this guy named Lenny Arthur, who is in the film club that Ned is over. There's also Gwen Jethro, who is his girlfriend. Tony Trainer, who he's a famous film guy, a Hollywood guy. He just happens to be in River Heights for whatever reason. There's also a guy named Mike Jordan, who I just put Property Man in parentheses. There is Denise, another member of the film club. She's like their Foley artist. Her last name is actually Foley, which I found to be hilarious. There's a guy named Professor Walter Barnes, and he's over the film club, like he, heads it at the university that Ned goes to, Emerson. There's Jack Billings, who is a camera guy. Jane Logan, who's also in the film group. There's a lot of film club people. Sarah White, another member. Mr. Ullman, who is a realtor. Dr. Frida Davis, who's a computer specialist from Westmore College. Roger Harlow, who is the owner of this place called Rainbow Ranch. Tina, who is Roger's granddaughter. Hugh Morstan, who is an ad agency owner / horse breeder. Kurt Elam, who works for the Harlows, and he's a horse trainer. Alf Sanchez, an older stable hand who also worked for them. Pepper Nash, who was a horse jockey. Judd Bruce, who's a rival horse owner. Velma Dean, another rival horse show woman, Lou Yelvey, another ex-farmhand of Rainbow Ranch, and Howard Ainsley, who is a business rival. Oh my gosh, that was so many names. I'm so sorry. That is a lot to keep up with. And luckily for us, some of these people come in at different points in the story. They're not all just introduced at once like I just did, but it's kind of like have you ever been in one of those conversations where someone is trying to convince you that you know somebody that they know, and they're just like, yeah, so-and-so. And you're like, no, I don't know who that is. Why are they important? Please tell me why. I promise you, I will tell you why these people are important a little bit later as we get through this episode. So now, really quickly, I'll go ahead and read a brief synopsis for Race Against Time. Nancy is helping Ned with a film project at a local mansion, but weird things start happening. Robberies, a stolen horse, and sabotage from ex-film club members. Are the cases intertwined, and can Nancy solve them both? And now for a dramatically read newspaper headline synopsis. Local robberies stopped by teen sleuth. So now let's go ahead and jump into the bulk of the direct notes that I took down for Race Against Time. So our story starts with Nancy, Bess, and George riding horses through the woods around River Heights, and Bess asks Nancy if she's going to help locate this missing racehorse in the area. It was stolen and it's made the news, and George says that the River Heights Record, this local newspaper, said Nancy should be hired to find it, but Nancy says she hasn't been formally asked to help. So while they're talking about this cat runs in front of Bess's horse and spooks it, but thankfully she's able to stay in the saddle. After they calm down from that, George also tells Nancy that a note was left on her windshield and she forgot to give it to her, so she hands it to her and Nancy opens it. And the note says, "If the River Heights Record tries to hire you, tell them no deal. You might get hurt." And Nancy says it's probably a prank, but she'll give it to the police. Now, we all know that it's not a prank, and it's funny too that Nancy's mystery solving abilities follow her wherever she goes, because somebody is already afraid that she's going to work on this case. So afraid that they're like, I'm going to leave this note on her car. If Nancy had a catchphrase, it would probably be meddling since 1930. So the girls continue towards Grimsby Mansion, which is this house in Brookvale Forest where Ned and the film club he's in have gotten permission to film at, and they got permission from this local realty company. I think I said this in another episode, but there seems to be no shortage of just creepy, spooky looking old houses around River Heights, because we had Twin Elms and the Hidden Staircase, Blackwood Hall and the Ghost of Blackwood Hall, but I'm looking forward to seeing what's wrong with this one. So Ned is making this movie to enter it into a film contest, and Nancy has a small role in the film, and she explains to Bess and George that it's going to be a vampire horror spoof, and Ned and another guy in the group, Lenny Arthur, wrote scripts, but the group chose Ned's script over Lenny's. And I wrote down in my notes, because of the way Nancy said this, I was like, what tells me this guy Lenny is going to have sour grapes about this? So the three of them get to Grimsby Mansion and they see the film club, and Nancy mentions there may be a mystery there because the house is over 100 years old, but Ned and the realtor said when they first looked around, it looked like someone had been inside recently. which is kind of weird. So this next thing that I wrote down, I just thought this was kind of cool, but we get confirmation that Emerson College is located in another state. And I knew that it was a bit of a drive from River Heights because of books like Nancy's Mysterious Letter and The Phantom of Pine Hill, but I just thought that was kind of cool. It actually says it's in another state. Still no confirmation on what state River Heights is supposed to be in. There's a lot of arguments that it's in Illinois or Iowa or even New York. Like, there's a lot of arguments for different areas of the United States. But anyways, so the girls are at Grimsby Mansion, and there's also a guy there named Tony Trainer, and he's just a famous film director who's agreed to give the film group some pointers. I just said I find it hard to believe that a director of his caliber would be traipsing around in the woods for free to give some college kids some pointers, but okay, it's a Nancy Drew book, so I'll just go with it. But it would kind of be like Steven Spielberg just showing up and just being like, okay guys, this is how you need to film this scene. I don't know, stranger things have happened, I guess. So there's this girl in the film club named Gwen Jethro, and she's Lenny Arthur's girlfriend. Lenny being the guy that his script did not get picked and Ned's got picked over his. But she is so petty and competitive, and I think there was an annoying girl named Gwen in the Spider Sapphire mystery too. Like, one of the ghostwriters must have had something against people named Gwen. But Gwen asks Nancy if she knows her lines yet, because Nancy has a few lines in the movie, and Nancy says no, but she's a member of the Footlighters acting group, which was mentioned in the Clue of the Dancing Puppet book. So Nancy's like, yeah, I have some acting experience, I'm sure I'll be fine. Also, come on, she's Nancy Drew. She does not need a dress rehearsal. She picks up these strange and obscure talents just out of nowhere, and she doesn't need to practice ever. She's got this. So Gwen, of course, scoffs at this, and she tells Nancy acting in front of a camera is very different from being on a stage, and the Footlighters are a bunch of amateurs. Oh, shots fired. But Tony Trainer, who is the director guy, he defends the group of the Footlighters, and he's like, they're a very talented group, Gwen. And then Gwen starts posing and looking at herself in this prop mirror. Like, it's really awkward. Like, if I had somebody doing this around me, I'd be like, do you need to be alone for a second? Like, what are you doing? But she starts showing off, and then she trips near a creek bed and the mirror goes flying. But no need to fear, Nancy Drew is here. So with lightning fast reflexes, Nancy pushes her heels into the flanks of this horse that she's riding, which is named Black Prince, and she goes forward, swings out of the saddle, and saves this mirror from crashing on the ground. Like, forget Nancy Drew actress, she apparently needs to be a stunt woman, because I don't know how you could do that in 3 seconds flat, but she just did. So naturally, everyone is impressed and claps and applauds Nancy for saving this mirror, and Tony Trainer says it's one of the finest displays of natural horsemanship he's ever seen. Because of course it is. So he says he wants to film Nancy in an upcoming commercial, and Gwen gets so jealous. So not only does Nancy turn this girl trying to like mean girl her around, but she gets a job out of it, which is crazy. So next, everyone in the film club goes inside Grimsby Mansion to look at where they're going to be filming, and George sees where a note has been traced in the dust on a table, and it says, "Intruders beware. The penalty for disturbing this old house is death." Well, dang, that escalated quickly. So Gwen and Lenny are scared and they don't want to stay, so they just take off and leave. And Tony Trainer has work to do, you know, because he's a famous director. He has more important things to do than chaperone these teenagers. So he leaves, and then everyone else stays behind to clean the mansion up because they want it to look spooky, but not too spooky. So they're kind of trying to help fix it up. That's what they told this realtor guy that they would do. They were like, well, we'll make sure everything looks better than how we found it, basically. So after they do that for a few hours, they all leave, and then Nancy goes home to get ready for dinner and a dance with Ned. And Hannah says someone called for Nancy while she was gone but didn't leave their name. So Ned comes to pick Nancy up for dinner, and they go to some place called the Lobster House and then to Westmore University's dance. And while they're at the dance, they see a rival film club, and Nancy notices that Gwen and Lenny are dancing nearby and just kind of looking at them weird. You know, just kind of staring and glaring at them like, you know, bad characters in a TV movie, just like, I'm just gonna stare you down. And so Nancy's afraid they're plotting something. And actually, while Nancy and Ned were at dinner, she had confided in him and said, you know, I think that they're trying to get us to leave the mansion in retaliation for the club picking Ned's script. She's not convinced that the note wasn't left by them, the one that was written in the dust. So while Nancy and Ned are dancing out on the dance floor, she switches partners and starts dancing with Ned's professor, Professor Walter Barnes, who's over the film club, and he says he's sorry Nancy can't be in the film anymore. And she's confused because she's like, I was just out there at the mansion today, like I'm still planning on being in this movie. But then the professor explains that he got a note on his desk saying she had to be in a commercial instead, and so Nancy thinks it was Gwen that left the note. And unfortunately, the professor gave Nancy's part to Gwen and sent out the contest form, so he may not be able to reverse it. So he wrote Gwen's name in place of Nancy's on the form, so he may not be able to undo that. But you know that Gwen did this. Like, she was so jealous when Nancy got all those compliments and embarrassed her and got a film commercial out of it. So, and then Gwen gets the part. Like, it's too convenient. So later after the dance, Nancy and Ned are driving home and they see flames that are coming from the direction of Grimsby Mansion. So they drive over there, and when they get there, the stables are on fire. Luckily, some firemen show up to help out because apparently some other people in the area saw the smoke and called it in, but they put out the blaze and they all suspect arson. It's also kind of strange because someone at the dance, her name is Dr. Frida Davis, said that the realtor, Mr. Ullman, who is over the Grimsby Mansion property, thought that hippies might have been staying in the house at one point, and Nancy wonders if they're back. It's kind of funny because the book directly says hippies, and Nancy's like, maybe the hippies are back. They must have set fire to this place. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And maybe we should just rule out every other option before we accuse people. I don't know. So the next day, Bess comes over to have brunch with Nancy at her house, and Hannah tells Nancy that she has a phone call. And the person on the phone is Roger Harlow, and he is the owner of a horse farm called Rainbow Ranch. And he wants Nancy's help, but wants to talk in person, so he invites her to his house to have tea. So Nancy goes to the ranch, and Roger says he'll pay her for her help, but Nancy declines, of course, because she's Nancy, and Roger says he wants her help finding his missing horse, whose name is Shooting Star. He says that Shooting Star got his name from the distinctive white star marking that he has on his left side. And while Nancy's there, Roger Harlow also says that Mr. Trainer, the director, wants to film his horse commercial with Nancy at his ranch. And Mr. Trainer actually calls while Nancy is with Mr. Harlow, and he asks that she come back to the ranch the next morning for some test shots. And Nancy tells him she will, and that any payment she would have gotten should go to the River Heights Animal Shelter. Now that's nice, and Nancy has a big heart, but can she get her bag like once? Like, in the span of 10 minutes, she has turned down being paid twice. Like, I just can't with her sometimes. I think this is another underlying trope in the Nancy Drew series. Like, Nancy herself is rich. Like, her dad, Carson, has a very good job. He has money. Therefore, Nancy has money. But she always encounters these people who are stealing money. Like, it's just always kind of like this underlying theme of like, money is bad and you can't want money, or you're bad, like you're a bad person. So it's just kind of weird. I don't know why Nancy can't be paid for her services. But anyways, while Nancy is there at the Harlow house, she sees a portrait of Roger's late wife, whose name is Cynthia, and she's wearing a gorgeous opal necklace on a silver chain, and Roger tells Nancy that she passed away recently. So later, Nancy gets a call from Ned when she gets home, and he says that Mr. Ullman, the realtor, is furious about the fire that happened at Grimsby Mansion, and he blames the film club for it. So now he doesn't want them to film there at all. Nancy tells Ned, though, she's like, don't worry, we'll figure it out. So this next thing that I wrote down, this is crazy, but Black Prince, the horse that Nancy was riding, is Nancy's horse because Carson asks where she's stabling him. So they can afford a horse. That's gotta be not cheap to board a horse somewhere. But honestly, I'm more in favor of this mode of transportation. Nancy does not need a boat. So next, Nancy goes back to Rainbow Ranch the next day, and there's a slew of cameramen. There's Mr. Trainer, Mr. Harlow, and Trainer's assistant, whose name is Marty Martin, and this makeup artist named Philippe. And Philippe says Nancy doesn't need much in the makeup department, and she has wonderful cheekbones. I mean, what does Nancy not have? Like, she has great horsemanship skills, she has great cheekbones, she solves mysteries on the daily, like, she has the life. So Nancy rides around on the provided horse while the photographer snaps pictures, and she notices there's this little girl watching her nearby, but she gets scared and runs away. And when Nancy asks Mr. Harlow about her, he says that it's his granddaughter, Tina, and all of a sudden she has become withdrawn and scared of horses. So while they're wrapping up this commercial shoot, to, this man shows up whom Mr. Trainer says is Hugh Morstan, and he owns a competing ad agency, breeds horses, and he happens to be Mr. Harlow's neighbor. So Mr. Morstan shows Mr. Harlow this newspaper article, and then he falls over in shock. And Mr. Trainer and Mr. Morstan carry Mr. Harlow into the house where Nancy administers first aid, and this maid shows up and she says, oh, here's some medication that he also is supposed to take, but he usually doesn't. So Nancy's able to get him to take the medication, and then Mr. Morstan apologizes about upsetting Mr. Harlow, but he doesn't really sound sincere to Nancy. And when Nancy reads the newspaper article after everyone leaves, it seems to imply that Mr. Harlow doesn't have much faith in Shooting Star being in this upcoming race and winning. So there's kind of some speculation that Shooting Star went missing for other reasons. So Mr. Harlow notices and sees Nancy reading the article, and he says he's also been accused of stealing the horse himself, even though he's bet a lot of his own money on the horse to win. So he's like, why would I do that? Why would I make this horse disappear when I have so much money tied up in this race? So once he's feeling better, Mr. Harlow takes Nancy out to the stables to look around for clues, where she meets a surly horse trainer named Kurt Elam. But he doesn't think Nancy can help, since even the police are having trouble locating the missing horse. Mr. Elam also mentions that there was an older ranch hand on duty on July 4th, the night when Shooting Star was stolen, and his name was Alf Sanchez, but he fell asleep on watch. And Kurt says he's older and he gave some bogus story about his coffee thermos being drugged. And Kurt also says that he had the power to fire Alf, so he did. So Nancy gets his address so she can question him later. So later, after Nancy has left Rainbow Ranch, she goes on a date with Ned to some place called the Purple Parrot, which that's a fun name for a restaurant. But Ned says that Professor Barnes spoke to the people running the film contest and he can change the form, so Nancy now gets her part back. And so Gwen is out. In your face, Gwen. Mean girls never win. But there is still one little problem. The realtor, Mr. Ullman, still doesn't want them using Grimsby Mansion because of the fire. So Nancy and Ned are like, we're gonna have to do something about that. So while Nancy and Ned are at the restaurant, they also run into Bess and George, and George teases Bess about wanting to go see a local artist, saying she's only interested because he's handsome. And Bess just ignores George. She's like, whatever, George. And so she asks Nancy if she'll go with her to his exhibit sometime, and Nancy agrees. So after dinner, Nancy and Ned walk over to the Ullman Realty office, where Mr. Ullman yells and accuses Ned of arson again. And Nancy explains they were at a dance and they passed the mansion coming and going, and they only saw the fire leaving the dance, so they couldn't have started it. And she also sweetens the pot and says the group will do some repairs on the mansion if they're provided with materials, and they'll mention Ullman Realty in the credits for the film that Ned's making. And so Mr. Ullman, seeing an opportunity to exploit teenagers and get free labor, says, of course. So he agrees to let them still have access to Grimsby Mansion for their film project. So next, Nancy and Bess go see Alf Sanchez, the guy who said that his coffee was drugged, and he insists that he's innocent, and Nancy says she'll help prove his innocence. So after talking to him, she goes to see Chief McGinnis, which we haven't seen Chief McGinnis in a few books. I was excited to see his name pop up, but she asks if they can run tests on the thermos of Alf Sanchez's and see if his fingerprints are on it. Now, the next day, Nancy and Bess go to Grimsby Mansion to film, and Nancy gets into an old 1890s style gown, and in the film, she has recently bought this house in the script, but she doesn't know that a vampire lives in the basement. And it's so funny because in this scene, Gwen is having to play the maid to Nancy, and so action is called, and this light begins to fall, and Gwen spills a tray of red liquid all over Nancy's dress. So everyone in the film club gets into an argument, and Gwen insists that it was an accident, but Nancy knows it wasn't. I mean, Gwen has been gunning for Nancy and her part since day one, but Gwen and Lenny leave in a huff, and they just say, we're not coming back, and Bess takes over, and she gets to play Gwen's part as the maid. So the film club starts rearranging some furniture for another scene, and while they're doing that, Nancy finds a silver vase underneath a chair, and after they're done filming for the day, she and Bess take it to the police, thinking that it might have been stolen, because this place is supposed to have been abandoned and empty for a while, and the vase looks too new to have been left there for that long. So while they're at the police station, they get an update from Chief McGinnis, who also says that Alf Sanchez's fingerprints were nowhere on that coffee thermos, so it had to have been swapped out. And Chief McGinnis says that there's an ex-farmhand hand that they're investigating, and his name is Lou Yelvey, and he went to work for Mr. Morstan, but he was quickly fired from that job too, so that doesn't look too good for him. And the police are also thinking that Shooting Star was ridden away from the scene when he was stolen on July 4th instead of loaded into a trailer, so they think that the thieves rode him directly through Brookvale Forest, which would have gone right near Grimsby Mansion. And Nancy's beginning to think that the horse theft might have been an inside job. So next, Nancy, Bess, and George discuss the case more over a snack at the Drews' house when Nancy gets a phone call, and she's going to be in not one, but 3 commercials. And I thought you guys would think it's funny. It's not even a commercial for horses or horse-like products. It's a commercial for Venus Beauty Soap. I'm picturing a very cheesy 80s style commercial. They say that Venus is the goddess of beauty, and now you can be like Venus with Venus Beauty Soap. So Nancy next decides to go see Ned on campus to talk over the film schedule, and she sees Gwen and Lenny on campus talking to this, and the book describes him as a spotty-faced man, and they act like they don't want to be seen, so that is suspicious. And Nancy notes that the man looks really familiar to her too. So after talking to Ned for a little while, Nancy goes to see Mr. Harlow again, and she sees Tina playing with a kitten on the lawn, but she looks scared at seeing Nancy and she runs off. And Nancy tells Harlow about the thermos not having Sanchez's fingerprints on it, and asks if he has any other people that he suspects of stealing Shooting Star. And Mr. Harlow mentions Lou Yelvey, Pepper Nash, an ex-jockey, and Velma Dean, who was a rival horse show competitor of his daughter Zona, and this other guy named Judd Bruce, who also entered a horse in the upcoming race. That's a lot of people. I'm like, why are you just now mentioning this to Nancy? So when Nancy goes to leave, she finds this drawing on her windshield of her car in red crayon, and it's of a horse and a skull and crossbones, and Nancy thinks it might have been Tina that did it, but she decides not to mention it and cleans it off at a nearby gas station. And after doing that, Nancy goes by to see Hugh Morstan, and he is talking to someone in the driveway, so he leads Nancy inside to talk, and Nancy asks him about Lou Yelvey since he used to work for him, and he says he was just a troublemaker. Nancy also takes this opportunity to ask about the newspaper article that he showed to Mr. Harlow, and Mr. Morstan says that Shooting Star could be beat by Judd Bruce's horse Minaret, and he also says that Pepper Nash, the jockey, is a hothead. So next, Nancy goes to pay a visit to Judd Bruce, who has a realty office on Main Street, and he's just really aggravated with her being there and acts really shifty, and he says he isn't the only one who owns Minaret, but doesn't want to tell Nancy who else co-owns him. Okay, so after this, Nancy goes to film one of the other commercials for Venus Beauty Soap, and the horse they use, whose name is Stormy, almost bucks her off, and when Nancy checks under the saddle, there was a nut. But Kurt Elam, the stable guy, blames a stable boy for the incident. This reminds me a lot of Secret of Shadow Ranch. Like, I think Shorty put something under Nancy's saddle in that book too. It's just like, I think if I was Nancy, I would check my saddle before I got on my horse at all times. So next, Mr. Harlow tells Nancy that he asked if any of his staff uses sleeping pills because that's what was put in Alf Sanchez's coffee, and they said they didn't, and I was just like they would tell him that. I mean, like, it's kind of a personal question, and if you're dealing with somebody who snuck sleeping pills in this guy's coffee, I don't feel like they're gonna readily admit that information. So Nancy asks Mr. Harlow if she and Tina can go to Grimsby Mansion, and he says they can, and Tina is excited, but as they get closer to the mansion, she gets upset and runs away crying, and it turns out Tina is afraid of Grimsby Mansion and horses. So now the question is why? What has she seen at the mansion that has made her so terrified? So now Nancy goes to interview Lou Yelvey, the ex-employee of Mr. Morstan and Mr. Harlow, and he speaks badly of Mr. Morstan and Kurt Elam, and he also says that a cat used to hang around Shooting Star's stable. When have we seen a cat before? Maybe in the beginning of the story? So at this point in the book, Nancy, Bess, and George go to the art gallery that Bess really wanted to go to, and George keeps teasing her that the artist turns Bess on, and Bess is just like, no, I'm interested in the art, like, I don't like this guy. But while they're there at the art gallery, Velma Dean comes over. She happens to own this art gallery, but she's also a rival horse show woman, and she accuses Nancy of spying on her and asks them to leave. And when Bess accidentally knocks over a sculpture, Velma is furious. So there's this whole crowd of people just staring at them, and it's kind of embarrassing. But Nancy ends up writing a check for the damaged sculpture, and she offers to pay the $99 for it. But then, of course, Velma backpedals because she realizes she's looking like a jerk in front of all these people. So the next day, Nancy goes back to Grimsby Mansion for more filming with the film club, and the crew hears noises that indicate that they're not alone and someone else is in the house. So they see two men running off into the woods, and Nancy later notices a painting is missing. So not only was someone in the house with them, but they're stealing stuff. But she remembers that it was a square-shaped painting, and yet there's a stain on the wall from dust and age that indicates that it's oval-shaped. So Nancy goes to report this incident to the police at headquarters, and she describes the painting, which was of a fox hunt. She remembers what the subject matter was, and the detective on duty, Chief McGinnis is at the dentist for a toothache apparently, says that painting was reported as stolen, and the silver vase that they brought to them was returned to its owners, and it had also been stolen. So somebody has been stealing pieces from other houses and leaving them at the Grimsby Mansion. So Nancy and Ned go together to look around Brookvale Forest for this black van that was apparently seen on the night Shooting Star was stolen, and Nancy finds a part from the van and later the van itself, which is filled with tools. So they take the van's keys to headquarters and they report it. So the next note that I took down, Nancy shoots the second commercial for Venus Beauty Soap on her own horse, Black Prince, and she also goes for a walk with Tina, and they see a tortoiseshell cat, the same one that spooked Bess's horse at the beginning of the book. Now, after this, Nancy goes to film at Grimsby Mansion again. I feel like they went to Grimsby Mansion a lot, which I know that's the point of the story. We have to film this movie, and that takes a long time, but it kind of felt sort of repetitive after a while. But there's smoke pouring out of an upper window this time, and it's a smoke bomb, and Ned finds a scrap of green fabric on this tree branch by the window, proving that someone threw it in the upper open window from that tree. So next, Nancy goes by the library to read and study up on horse racing because she doesn't really know that much about it, and she sees Mr. Morstan, but he doesn't see her. And when Nancy goes to check out, she sees that he's gone, but the magazine he was looking at is still there laying open. So she goes over to look at it, and it's open to an article about Mr. Harlow, and he was in a legal battle with someone named Howard Ansley. So they got into a proxy fight, both trying to buy up stock to have control of this particular company. So Nancy files that away for later, and she and Ned go to film a night scene for the movie at Grimsby Mansion, and Ned comments, "It's such a nice night. It's almost a waste to spend it filming," and Nancy kisses him on the cheek. Smooth, Mr. Nickerson. So the film club tries to film this night scene, and Ned is the vampire in this scene, but they have their film ruined by a bright light and loud voices, and the film is really expensive. They can't just like rewind it, and you know, it's complicated. It was the 80s. So Nancy has the idea to pretend to leave so they can come back and catch the people doing this. So they're really loud and pretend to leave in their cars, and then they come back on foot and they catch the spotty-faced guy that Nancy saw talking to Gwen and Lenny earlier on campus, and they figure out that they've been talking to this rival film club, so they agree to stop bothering them, and they say they'll pay for the ruined film, and they leave. So the next day, Nancy goes to talk to Mr. Morstan again, and she asks him why he was reading an article about Mr. Harlow at the library, and he drops the bombshell that Howard Ansley has now moved to the area, so another suspect has just arrived. I personally think we have plenty of suspects, but that's just me. So Mr. Morstan said he was glad to help, and the information may or may not be important, and I just said, is anyone else's radar going off? Like, you've got to watch out for those super helpful suspects sometimes, the ones that are like, oh, yeah, I'm just trying to help you out, and they'll just give you tidbits of information. It's like, why are you trying to help me, though? Are you trying to get me to come to a different conclusion other than you're the one that's guilty? So Nancy goes back for another day of filming at Grimsby Mansion, and while they're doing a scene, they start hearing this buzzing in the basement. So Ned and this guy named Mike go to turn the lights on, and they won't work. So Nancy grabs a flashlight from her car, and it's a good thing that she does because the guys find a wire stretched over the stairs. So it was meant to make them trip and fall and hurt themselves. And the source of the noise turns out to be an alarm clock. So it's deliberate sabotage. So after this, Nancy goes to pick Bess up for her scenes in the afternoon, and while Nancy is opening curtains for better lighting back at the mansion, she sees something sparkling in the bushes outside. So she goes to check it out, and it's an opal pendant, and she recognizes it because she's seen it in a portrait of Roger Harlow's late wife. And so when Nancy mentions it to Tina, she says it was her late grandmother's, but please don't tell her grandfather. And I think it's pretty safe to say that Tina borrowed it and lost it at Grimsby Mansion, but Nancy says she won't tell Mr. Harlow. Now, later, Nancy goes to buy shampoo at the store, and she hears a woman angrily trying to refill her prescription of sleeping pills. So Nancy perks up because, she's been talking to the police about sleeping pills, and Alf Sanchez had sleeping pills put in his coffee, and it turns out to be Velma Dean who's arguing with the pharmacist. And Nancy wonders if those same pills could have been placed in Alf Sanchez's thermos. And the pharmacist did say she'd already refilled the prescription once, so it's possible. So next, Nancy shoots the final soap commercial, and then she plays catch with Tina and a beach ball, but Tina trips and starts rolling down a hill towards a pond, and she's able to catch herself on some bushes, and Nancy helps her into the stables to clean the cuts. But when Nancy goes to grab a bottle of iodine, Tina gets scared and runs off, and Nancy's kind of wondering, why did she react that way? But the next thing she ends up doing is going to talk to Pepper Nash, the ex-jockey, and I said not much was really learned from this, but she went and talked to him. So Nancy goes back to Grimsby Mansion, and while she's there, she sees that there's fresh hay near this burned down stable, and she starts thinking the mansion has been empty for years, but why would there be fresh hay? So a horse was kept there recently, maybe Shooting Star. So after this, Nancy goes back to talk to Tina and gets the girl to confess, and she says she was scared of the iodine bottle because of the skull and crossbones on it. It reminded her of a man that was wearing a skeleton costume that she saw riding horseback near Grimsby Mansion, which is why she was scared of Nancy riding horseback the other day, and it explains why she's afraid of the mansion. So Nancy's almost positive that the man in the skeleton costume has been robbing houses in the area, and while Nancy and Tina are talking, they see Patches the cat, and another piece of the mystery just clicks into place, because Patches may know where Shooting Star is because she used to hang around his stall. So she's covered in white dust that could be from an abandoned mine nearby, according to Tina. So Nancy and Tina decide to go to the mine, and Nancy sees Kurt Elam on the way to the car, and he's wearing green trousers that match the fabric that Ned found near the mansion. So he must have been the one that threw the smoke bomb into the mansion. So Nancy and Tina finally get to the mine, and they find a horse, but it doesn't have a white star marking like Shooting Star. But Nancy and Tina get on the horse to see where it will take them, and it gallops right back to the Morstan farm. So while they're at the Morstan farm, they see a horse in a stall with the name Benbow, and on a hunch, Nancy takes some nail polish remover and wipes it on the dark horse to reveal white markings. And it's Shooting Star. So Shooting Star has been at this neighboring ranch the entire time, and Mr. Morstan and his groom grab Nancy, but Tina is able to get away. And Mr. Morstan says that someone named Carp will get rid of Nancy, and Carp had a thing going with Kurt Elam. They robbed houses until they tried to rob Mr. Morstan, and then he blackmailed them into stealing Shooting Star for him. So luckily, Tina and the police show up, and the bad guys are arrested. So there is a happy ending, and luckily Nancy didn't have to be tied up too long. And at the end of the book, Ned's film wins in the contest, and Shooting Star wins the horse race. And it's funny, but I just realized that George was only in about 5% of this book. So now I'll do a segment of the podcast that I like to call What's Cooking. So in this book, we saw mentionings of coffee, tea, hamburgers and milkshakes, lemonade and potato chips, cucumber sandwiches and tea, chocolate mousse, milk sandwiches and fruit, shrimp casserole, quiche and salad, pork chops and biscuits, and Hannah apparently baked a blueberry pie. Now on to the section of the podcast that I like to call Add That to Your Resume. So the things that I said that Nancy could add to her resume for this book, she's a commercial model slash stunt woman. I mean, she did all those tricks on the horse and did a commercial for soap, which is kind of funny. She's also a first aid expert. She helped Mr. Harlow when he was not feeling well. She also doctored up Tina's cuts. And she's a film actress. Now let's talk about some of the things I liked and didn't like about Race Against Time. So the things I liked, there's a lot of characters that were set up correctly and it made sense to me, which that usually doesn't happen. Sometimes in the Nancy Drew books, it's like all these random characters are introduced and there's no proper setup. But the things I didn't like, this one kind of dragged on for me and felt a little bit repetitive. Even as I was reading my notes for this episode, I was just like, man, we go to this mansion a lot, which, I mean, that's required to solve the mystery, but it just kind of felt sort of repetitive like some of the books I've read in the past, like Mystery of the Brass-Bound Trunk. So when it comes to a magnifying glass rating, I would probably give Race Against Time 2 magnifying glasses. It was not my favorite book. It was still a fun read, but not one of the higher rated mysteries for me. So that concludes today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. For next week's episode, we're going to dive into the next book in the series, which is The Sinister Omen. And if you like stamp collectors and Nancy going to Florida, you'll definitely enjoy this one. Until next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of True Drew Podcast. Can't get enough of the podcast? Then check out my subscription series, True Drew Files, available on Apple and Spotify. For Nancy Drew books and merchandise, you can check out my website, www.truedrewpodcast.com. For business inquiries, you can contact me at truedrewpodcast@gmail.com, or you can connect with me on Instagram at True Drew Podcast.